Essentially, we have bigger networks. So, for example, bigger networks of neurons that make up the nervous system, essentially, that allows the nervous system to do useful things, to function, and essentially for survival and reproduction. So, neural networks, biological networks of neurons. We have neurons. They can be interconnected in many ways. There's hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of combinations, and just a few neurons, just for like a dozen, maybe 2 dozen neurons, you have maybe 50, 100 connections. I mean, that already gets pretty complicated. And as I said before, we have 100 billion neurons interconnected by 100 trillion synapses. So it gets complicated. And in I think section 6, maybe in section 4, 5, and 6 and onwards, we'll look at these neural networks in more detail. Biological neural networks and artificial neural networks. This is the visual system, Fellman and Van Essen, which if you study final year, I think if you're an undergrad student, you don't have to know this at A-level or the SATs, but if you study visual neuroscience in your third year at university, I mean, certainly I did, and you have to know all the connections there, okay? And actually, if you know between the LGN and V1 and V3 and the STP areas, the LIP, LIP, you have to know the connections, and knowing all the connections actually helps you understand how the visual system works, or how any organ widespread system works. And in section 6 we'll talk a lot more about that. Okay, so yes, we start with the basics here. We talked about the brain, a lot of neurons, and a lot of connections. And what we're going to talk about now, I guess, is okay, so what we have is the brain. We have the main divisions of the brain. We have, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, which are all the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Central nervous system is brain and spinal cord. And we have the sensory components, and we have the motor components. And the brain is very complicated. You have to understand that the sensory components and the motor components are intrinsically related. I mean, it's very hard to... You can't dissociate them, obviously. We have compartmentalization in the nervous system, as shown here. But we'll see that you kind of have to understand the whole picture to understand any given components, okay? And similarly, vice versa, you have to understand each component to understand the whole system as a whole. So here, this is a simple diagram which pretty much summarizes neuroscience. We have the sensory information that I've just discussed, not just from the visual system, from any sensory system, that's integrated in the brain. We have sensorimotor integration and cognitive functions, which we'll look at in section 5. But for this video, it's just going to be sensory and motor. And essentially, motor is intrinsically related to sensory information in the sense that motor systems process sensory information, but also as you move, for example, as you behave, there's sensory feedback there. You move your arm. If you move your hand or your arms, there is proprioceptive and tactile feedback. There's also visual feedback as you move, right? So it's very hard. You can dissociate the sensory and motor systems, but it's just, as a neuroscientist, again, the emphasis there that is probably not emphasized at school, but certainly at university, you have. My mic is falling off for some reason. The microphone. There you go. So I hope you can hear this properly. But at university, you have to know how these functions are integrated. So we looked at this before: input, process, output. That's the nervous system in a nutshell. And there's feedback loops and kind of self, in the process. It's very complicated when you look at processes, as we've seen already. Sensory motor integration there you go, is what we're interested in. So we looked at sensory system, we looked at the motor system in very briefly, and what you need to know is that this is this is the sensory and motor homunculus, I think that's what it's called, in the cortex. And you can see on the left here and on the right that certain parts of the brain, certain parts of the body are overrepresented compared to other parts. Look, you can see the face and the lips and the face and the head, facial expression in terms of sensation to the face and lips and mouth, and also the expression, the muscle contractions in the face and lips. We have the hand and the fingers. These areas, the face and the hands, are as you can see, highly overrepresented, both in the sensory cortex and the motor cortex. That's not a coincidence. Okay, again, the main thing I want to communicate to you is the sensory and motor systems are intrinsically interrelated and are based on receptors in the skin, or receptors, sensory receptors, and muscle effectors. And all of this is essentially based on how the brain is based on neural control, and it's based on the algorithms in the brain that integrates all the sensory information and then controls all the motor outputs. In section 6, in the 6th video I'll talk more about the computations and systems neuroscience, because for now that's all you need to know. I mean, I think we've covered in enough depth for A-level or first year university. If you're in a university, you'll have to know a bit more detail than that. You'll have to know the experiments of how we know all this if you're writing essays on neuroscience. I won't go through this. That's pretty much it. You know, this is I was just going to say about the way that, for example, when you catch a ball, when you grab a ball, there's the visual and motor information that's integrated. Pretty much anything that you do, any behavior that I can think of, is based on, what I'm trying to say is, this right here, to understand sensory and motor functions, both sensory and motor functions, you have to know how they work together.